This is our memories of you, Mother and Father, and from David, Elaine, and Ian.
Hello, Ian. My caring and loving mother was an example of correctness, accompanied good behaviour, strict on P's and Q's, said and did the right thing, and expected her children to do so also. She was a fussy dresser, a person who liked the table laid correctly, with everything that could possibly be wanted during the meal to hand. She would be put out if anyone, especially father, had to get up and get something, anything for that matter, at mealtime. She was a great cook, would pluck and dress any game that either father brought in or I shot. Just spit the shot out, dear, you don't have to eat that, she once told me. She enjoyed being a member of various organisations, Towns Women's Guild in Ipswich, Inner Wheel at Woodbridge, and of course her beloved Mothers' Union as an enrolling member. No doubt there were others as a Christian. The church too, as a Christian, the church too benefited from her involvement and support throughout her life. She was energetic and determined, characteristics she needed and demonstrated in bringing up us four and discharging the many other duties and interests she had. Mother had a good sense of humour, loved to hear stories of any kind, and equally loved telling them too, especially light-hearted tales of family or indeed her relatives, neighbours, her hairdresser, house cleaner, and friends, many of whom were deep-rooted and therefore long-lasting. In later life she would begin with the words, "Did I tell you?" I always shook my head, even if I had, because she loved telling them. And I loved hearing them. She would do anything for her family and friends. I used to take home my stinky stuff, particularly when I was serving in submarines, which she would wash and iron over the weekend, so I could take everything back on Sunday, only for a repeat performance the weekend following. What service, what devotion, what love. She thought of others, helped others, was kind to others, kept in touch with others too. She loved her time in Swaziland and was devoted to the Sunday school children, whilst father battled away to get the Bishop of Swaziland's school accounts back to order following years of neglect. Catherine Constance Taylor, my mother, was born in 1919 in Sudbury, West Suffolk. She was an intelligent and energetic woman who loved poetry and an informative and in many ways prolific letter writer. During World War II, she joined the ATS as an officer before meeting father towards the end of the war. They married in 1944 and as a couple were clever enough to have twins, Jenny and David, one of each at first go. Two more children followed, Elaine and Ian. The family settled initially into Ipswich, 83 Constable Road. My mother and father were keen to foster family ties, and grandparents who also lived in Ipswich were visited weekly. Father worked as a clerk in Barclays Bank in the town. Mother was stuck with us lot at some previous point. The family had a spell in Southwold, a place where we become more familiar with some years later. Sugar was rationed, and we collected bits and pieces like orange juice from the food office in Ipswich. Things must have been pretty tight, money-wise, and Mother no doubt was a dab hand at making ends meet. Knitting, sewing, cooking and providing, I do not recall us ever being hungry or cold or without the basics during those post-war World War II challenging years. A tribute to them both. We walked a lot, took the bus occasionally, and at weekends, when bicycles were the order of the day, had regular family outings to the countryside, notably Tuddenham. In about 1954, Father bought a car, and our excursions from home broadened somewhat. Shortly after, Father was promoted to manager within the bank, and we moved to Bank House. That's in Eden Market, about 4 miles away. Arthur Robert Wilby Scott was born in Ipswich on the 7th of June 1910. He was educated at a municipal school in the town and matriculated there also. He joined Barclays Bank as a junior clerk and had a motorbike to get about on. A regular visitor to Paris in the 1930s, he often spoke of his enjoyable time in France. He could pick up and play almost any musical instrument, his sister Aunt Dole once said, and would play the piano and sing with us children. Oh, grasshopper sitting on a railway track, singing Polly Wolly Doodle all the day, picking his teeth with a parpit tack, singing Polly Wolly Doodle all the day was one. Swanee River was another, and there were many more. He loved art, sketching and painting in oil and watercolour. He was modest about his work, but some of it was pleasing and well regarded. He entered Barclays exhibitions and was always priced the picture highly, in his words, not to sell. But occasionally he would observe, they've given that one a good spot, must have liked it. He loved woodwork too, and woodwork projects in essence, in woodwork projects. In essence, he was a sensitive, scrupulously honest and genuine individual whose sense of humour was never far away. He's a fellow in this Institute of Bankers, and his characteristics made him ideally suited to responsible lending in the bank business. If the bank had introduced on-target earnings earlier, he would have left it. He took his judgment of the individual heavily into account when deciding whether to lend him money. At Eden Market, he maintained a bottle of whisky and 2 glasses in a hidden wall cupboard to cover really difficult issues. When balancing the books in the days before mechanisation, he would accurately total up an extremely long column of figures at impressive speed, equivalent to inputting an adding machine. Such was his talent. Many of Father's customers were farmers, and some became family friends. Visits provided an opportunity for us children to roam around the farmyard, sit on the tractors, play in the straw, and run around with dogs. Both mother and father liked the rural feel, the freedom, the countryside, the lanes, the villages, and church architecture of Suffolk, where favourites of Father, not by his own admission, a clubby person. He did, however, attend a post-war reunion of the Desert Rats. He was in the 7th Sharpshooters and maintained after it was okay for 10 minutes and then there was little else in common. He and his fellow soldiers had gone their separate ways. He never attended another gathering. He was, however, an advocate of Montgomery and used to speak of the RSM, the Regimental Sergeant Major, who had a boy-girl twins, and because of this, he used to see Scotty as a chum to drink with. And his opening words, "I think I might get a little inebriated tonight, and you can accompany me." Father dreaded this and made any excuse to worm out of it. Father had some close calls in the fighting at Alamein. A bullet entered the barrel of the gun of the tank he was in as the radio operator, and there was another incident when he singly confronted a German soldier, one to one. Father pulled his pistol and the German ran off. Father was wounded by a shell that exploded near his ankle and spent some time in convalescence in Egypt, probably where he met the RSM referred to earlier. Eventually, fully healed, he returned and was demobbed in 1945. By then, of course, us twins were a bit bigger. As a couple, I always enjoyed seeing them. Plenty to chat about and catch up with family news, and we would often talk of their adventures in Swaziland. There were visits to Figsbury Ring, where we'd play knockheads, Stonehenge and plenty to do in the garden at Winterslow. Father was hugely interested in the latest Royal Navy ships, engineering problems. I was involved at the time and would question me closely on details. Mother would make sure I'd completed the task beyond Father outside before I left. And of course, provide an excellent meal, or more. Once settled in Stratford Subcastle, they took holidays at a hired bungalow in Somerset, and occasionally I would join them for a couple of hours or so, and when I was driving home from Portsmouth. A delightful break, fond memories indeed. If Father was using the toilet and you tried to get in the door without knowing who was within, you certainly got the message, if not everyone in the household, as he would bellow, "Occupied!" He could certainly be emphatic. And I remember having a round of golf with him at Southwold, and he watched me swinging away, hacking myself through the course, using his clubs. You could share in those days, and he said I would never be any good at the game. I was around 19 years of age. Couldn't possibly improve with my life ahead of me. He was dead right, of course. I never did. When I was at boarding school, he used to say, "I never miss you because I have to pay your fees." Well. In the scullery next to the kitchen at Bankhouse Needham Market, there was a ginger beer making plant. Making. Father took great pride in producing it. We would all know when the brew was ready, as the corks would explode out of their bottles like gunshots at random intervals, therefore always taking us by surprise. In Southwold, Father didn't really have to go far, as the house incorporated the bank. He simply went downstairs to work, and in every sense worked from home. He had to. He spent effort in re-establishing it, the bank that is, as Barclays Bank was opposed to his predecessor's stamp on it as Wright's Bank. Father had his 80th birthday on the 7th of June 1980 and spent the day itself on board my last ship, HMS Chatham. The ship's cooks made him a cake, and we all sang as he blew the candles out. Afterwards he said he'd enjoyed himself so much he wished he'd had it years ago, typically demonstrating his Cajun sense of humour. Now looking back, I shall miss them. And that is because, though strict, in many ways they were strict about the right things. Their upbringing, example and love helped me have a successful career and lead a healthy life. I feel I am hugely fortunate to have had such parents. Father would be quick to add, "Well, you didn't have any choice, did you?"
My earliest memory of Mother is when I was in my pushchair facing her. It suddenly started to pour with rain. She got very wet, but I was snug and dry under the hood and waterproof apron. I remember Father being very kind and sympathetic when I fell over as a very young child, and also of him taking newly baked biscuits from the cooling rack, something we were forbidden to do. Once a year, Mother and Father went to the annual dinner dance run by the bank. They looked marvellous together, Mother in a long dress and father wearing a dinner suit and a bow tie. Our parents were very good at reading to us. When the twins started primary school, Mother would have Ian and I on her lap and read stories to us after lunch. I loved this and looked forward to this moment each day. Mother and Father bought the book Beowulf, and Father read it to us on Christmas Day. I did not like it at all, but perhaps I was too young to understand it. The wireless played an important part in our lives. Mother would sing some of the songs she had heard on it. Father, who was an accomplished piano player, with and without music, would play the songs, and others too. We could also join in Little Brown Jug, Darling Clementine, My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, Put Another Nickel In. My father could also tune a piano, and I remember watching him twiddling knobs and keys until he got it just right. No? Mother was a very economical and good cook, and Christmas dinner was a spectacular affair. Everything homemade with a beautifully laid table. We were allowed seconds of everything, including the Christmas pudding, which had been laced with brandy and set on fire. Father, naturally artistic, and he would draw pictures for Jenny and I to colour in. Invariably there were fairies, pixies, quaint little houses with crooked chimneys, flowers and trees. "How do you do it?" we would ask. And his reply was, "Easy, my dears." And that was the end of the lesson. Father was also good at carpentry and made a doll's house for Jenny and a doll's bungalow for me one Christmas. I was 5 years old, Jenny was 7. He painted a 5 on the door of mine and a 7 on the door of Jenny's. Mother had made curtains for the windows and carpets for the floors, and it was up to us to fill it with matchbox furniture and to make other bits and pieces necessary to create a home for small plastic dolls. Father also made me a bedside table for my birthday when I was little. The top was painted bright red and it has 2 shelves and is still as good as new. He was also very good at mending punctures, chains on our bikes, as well as fiddling with car engines and anything else mechanical. I remember Mother, on the other hand, with her horror of electrical gadgets. She was given an electric hand mixer. "Why would I want that?" she asked. And when she eventually acquired a washing machine, declared that hand washing got the clothes far cleaner and continued to scrub the collars of Father's white office shirts. Mother loved flowers. She knew the names of many wild ones and where they liked to grow. When we were out, she would also talk about what we should look for in the countryside. She was also very community-minded, and I remember her reading a hand-delivered letter early in the morning accusing the very new Mothers' Union of being unfriendly. It threw her into great consternation. She rushed round to the writer to put things right and later declared, "Never read your mail before breakfast." Mother could sew anything on a machine. She made a rabbit costume for me, complete with ears and tail, and an elf costume for Jenny to wear in our dance class show, as well as pretty party dresses with puff sleeves and gathered skirts. Most of my clothes were pass-ons, so new was especially nice. Unlike many of our friends, Mother and Father were keen that we should learn to swim. I'd learned to be safe in a pool, river, or sea. I remember on fine summer's Sundays, we would go to church only to leave the service before the sermon. The car, we had one by then, would be packed, plus food and drink, and we would set off to the seaside. Invariably, they would hire deck chairs, and we could do whatever we want. But they always warned, don't go out beyond the breakwaters. Mother had enjoyed all sport when at school, but Father had a real passion for cricket and would visit Lord's to watch a match perhaps once or twice a year. We had a cricket set, but I remember him overseeing and joining in French cricket in the garden, on the beach, in fact anywhere. He also taught me to play tennis, a game he was also keen on, and each year would buy ex-Wimbledon balls for us to use and lose. Mother and Father were very hospitable. Friends and family would come and stay, and sometimes they held small dinner parties or invited families for tea. We also had the treat of going to the pantomime, and Mother took Jenny and me to several ballet shows. I particularly remember Swan Lake. Oh yes, and we all loved the circus. Mother and Father were keenly interested in home and world news. They would encourage discussion on many topics, listen to our opinions, and sometimes strongly disagree. They were well read, particularly Mother's, whose books I was never allowed to choose at the library. Father, on the other hand, would instruct me to choose books of a certain size and by a male author. Mother had planned and gave me a 10th birthday party. All the children in my class at school were invited. It was a lovely sunny afternoon, and she and Father organised games and a treasure hunt, following clues which Father had made up. Mother provided a home-cooked afternoon tea, and we all had lots of fun. I mention this because we had a great deal more than some of my friends, but not nearly as much as many of them. Every penny was a prisoner to be used wisely. What we did have, though, was a very structured young life. Breakfast, cooked lunch, and a high tea were always eaten at a table covered with a cloth and cotton napkins. We had to eat everything on our plates and keep our elbows off the table and say our pleases and thank yous. However, no amount of nagging by Mother or Father could change me from a left-handed to a right-handed child, nor could any amount of nagging make me speak clearly. A wonderful school speech therapist cured my bilateral S defect when I was 10 years old. Mother and Father were strict in many ways, but this gave us a sense of security on how to cope with life in general. For that, I am very grateful. My memories of Mother and Father are so many, it is impossible to write them all down. It has been fun to think back on my early years. We did have a lovely childhood, and I feel grateful to Mum and Dad, and also to my lovely brothers and sister.
Dear Mother and Father, when you were both alive, I rarely wrote to you, but better late than never. I suppose I knew you best when I was growing up. I see you taking us on bikes to Tuddenham. Father managed to prop all the bikes against each other, and then we wandered down the River Finn. Did we catch sticklebacks or frog spawn? And then, after Sunday school, us the children came to you, Mother, and said we don't want to attend. Mother accepted it and backed us up when the organiser tried to dissuade her. One day Mother took us to Styles Farm and was given a black Labrador puppy. You said we were all to be very good, as Father had not agreed to getting a puppy. And you did agree, didn't you, Father? No one in our family can resist a dog, let alone a puppy. We used to visit grandparents every Saturday. Though sometimes we felt a little bit scared of them, nevertheless this could not be skipped. Sometimes we were let off to play in the garden. Pity you didn't teach us to play croquet properly, but we enjoyed our version. Do you remember Needham Market? Of course you do. It was one of Father's most enjoyable posts as a bank manager. We had 6 tall apple trees in the garden, and the bank staff enjoyed helping us pick the crop. You built a summer house of cedar wood. It was designed so it could be folded flat for transport. You painted it with linseed oil. Sometimes we children spent the night in the summer house, lulled to sleep in the pungent smell of cedar and linseed. There was a carnival parade in Needham, and Father built a box to hold Elaine standing up, and Mother made a dress so she could be a doll in a box for the fancy dress float. You both tried very hard to get us to pass the 11 plus, which gave entry to grammar school and then onward to university. But in spite of extra tuition you gave us, it was not enough. So you sent us to private schools. You valued education and tried hard to give us the best you could. Can I include 2 of my letters from boarding school that you, Mother, kept? Dear Mum and Dad, I hope that you are all right. Send some money for fireworks and more letter cards. I can't think of any more. Ian. Dear Mum, I hope that you are all right. I am. We are in quarantine for the rest of the term. All rugby matches have been cancelled. I hope to come home at half term. It is not compulsory to stay at school now. Today I feel on top of the world. I can't think of any more. Goodbye, Ian. Clearly I was all right at school. Mother, I remember the year Granny Taylor died. You and your sister had to clear Grandpa and Granny's house. There was nowhere for Grandpa to go but to live with us. He was so disabled he could hardly walk from his bed to his chair. Fairly quickly he became really bedridden. Mother, you had your own trouble with your uterus continually bleeding. You grew anemic and progressively weaker. Only Father forced you to see a doctor because you were unable to keep Grandpa. He was sent to a nursing home. He died within a week. Mother, you felt you should have kept him. You thought that surely you could have managed another 5 days. But who knows what might have been, and you were very ill. Father, you retired at age 60. You were happy to leave the bank where computerization and mechanization were changing its character. Was it only a year after that when Mother approached the Church of England missionary service? They said they could not use Mother, but Father could be a school bursar. So you both set off to Swaziland. Fortunately, Mother found lots of things to occupy her there, including Mother's Union, typing a book, socializing with the teachers, and welcoming visits from us. It was a fantastic experience, and Father, you had a projector and slides to illustrate the talks on your experiences there. Mother, was it you who organised the York weekend? It was the legacy from Grandpa and Granny had been distributed. The lawyer in Elgin largely had not acted in your interest in the sale of the properties owned by Granny. Nevertheless, it was now over, and we were all pleased it was over. So you both, all your children and grandchildren gathered in York, and it was good for us and you. We never managed to do it again. Father, you were in Salisbury Hospital when Mother had a burst aneurysm. Mother, you were in the bathroom and one of the neighbours noticed you had not opened the curtains as you usually did in the morning and raised the alarm. You were brought into hospital and they immediately operated successfully. But you had lost a lot of blood and your temperature had dropped dangerously. You were comatose in intensive care and all your children gathered together with Father. It must have been a couple of days after the burst aneurysm the surgeon called us in to say that Mother was dying. We went in to see that besides the respirator, all support had been removed. We, your children, went home pretty upset. But next day, when we came in, all the supports were back. Mother must have wakened and the nurses restarted care. I've always thought you were not ready to go and leave Father. You lived on for more than 10 years. Mother, when I was younger, you used to say, "Don't you ever think how lucky you are?" And yes, how lucky we were. I can't think of any more. Lots of love, Ian.